They found him on the banks of the Pharaohs River, just south of where the river splits into two, forming the mythical marshes that birthed the world. He was too far gone when they found him. His skin like clay, cracked and dried around his eyes, his tongue swollen and purple against his teeth. They laid him out on a mat and fanned him with palm fronds, but it was no use. Horus could not be saved. His sister Isis cradled his limp body as she wept. She blamed herself for his death. She should have known better than to let her brother take such a dangerous journey. But Horus had been adamant. Ever since their father had passed away, Horus wanted nothing more than to finish what their father started, to unify Egypt under their rule. And now he was dead, killed by Set, the god of chaos and storms, slain after defeating his armies, bringing their unification campaign to an end. She looked up from her brother's lifeless form as Nephthys, her other sister, arrived. With her was Anubis, the jackal-headed god of the afterlife, offered Horus the traditional cup of water to help his soul make its journey. But there was no need. Horus had already departed, his soul having fled the moment Set's spear had pierced his liver, according to Nephthys. She placed a hand on Isis's shoulder. "Do not blame yourself," she said. "Horus died a hero. He will be remembered for all time." But Isis only shook her head, her grief turning to anger. "He did not die in vain," she said, clenching her fists. "I will avenge him." As Anubis led the procession away, taking Horus's body back to the palace to prepare for his mummification, Isis swore revenge against Set. Meanwhile, across the country, in the village of Edfu, celebration turned to despair. Only hours ago, this place had been a hive of activity, a bustling hub of trade, its streets filled with merchants and farmers and laborers who'd come to pay homage to Horus. Now, it was a scene of carnage. Homes had been burnt and destroyed, corpses littered the ground, and the living stumbled among them, searching for loved ones. A woman holding a babe close cradled a charred corpse in her other arms. "Her husband," she whispered, her voice hoarse with grief. "Her father," a young boy replied, wiping tears from his eyes with a dirty sleeve. He had seen it happen, the burning, the killing. A group of soldiers loyal to Set had descended upon the village, slaying those who did not pledge allegiance to their god, setting fire to the homes of those who would not bend. Done. The boy looked down at the old man in his arms, his face wrapped in bandages. He was too young to remember what his father looked like, but he knew he was brave, that he fought alongside Horus, that he died a hero. He clutched the old man close, wishing he could bring him back to life. On the other side of town, a young girl cradled the limp body of a lion cub, its fur singed in places, its eyes staring sightlessly into the sky. Her name was Bastet, and this was her pet. She stroked the cub's fur, whispering soothing words into its ear. But the little beast was dead. It had been playing in the courtyard when the soldiers arrived, and she had tried to hide it. But they had found them and killed her Basset right in front of her. She walked numbly through the village, past the corpses of friends and neighbors, past the smoldering ruins of her home, until she came to the river. There she sat, cradling the dead cub in her lap, and wept. How could Set have done this? How had they ever done to him? Across the country, boats laden with prisoners were being towed toward the construction site of the new temple for the pharaoh. Men and women chained together, some kneeling on the deck, others sprawled across it, barely clinging to life. Some had been caught up in Horus' unification campaign, conscripted to serve as soldiers, while others had simply been unlucky enough to be traveling in the wrong place at the wrong time. Narmer sat on his throne, surveying the scene before him. Everything was going according to plan. His advisors told him that everything was perfect. The harvest had been good this year, the unification campaign a success, and the building of the new temple was progressing well. The only thing missing was a pharaoh. He looked down at the scepter in his hands, its surface worn smooth from years of use. It was time for that to change. He rose from his seat and began to walk among the prisoners, stopping every so often to inspect one of them. Here, a man whose leg was badly infected. There, a woman whose ribs showed through her emaciated frame. He had brought peace to the country. He knew that. But peace cost money, and he needed that money to build his temple. He would use these prisoners to do it, working them to death, just as his predecessors had done. That was the way of things. Finally, he came across a group of prisoners who caught his eye. Among them was a man with a strong jaw and wary eyes, a man who had once been a general in Horus's army. Narmer smiled. This man would do nicely as his vizier. Shh. And so it was that Egypt entered a new era. Under Narmer's rule, the country flourished. Trade routes were reopened, the economy stabilized, and construction of the great temples continued apace. The people were prosperous, but they lived in fear of their pharaoh, for he was a cruel and capricious ruler. At night, they heard the wails of prisoners working on the construction sites. In the morning, they found the bodies of those who had failed to meet their quotas, left as an example to the others. Still, most dared not speak out against him, for Narmer had shown them what he was capable of, when he had crushed the rebellion in Thebes. Only the very old and the very young remembered what life had been like before Narmer, when the country was ruled by pharaohs who cared about their people. But their memories were fading fast. In the palace, Narmer watched as his son Khufu learned to wield a scepter. The boy was eager, his eyes bright with excitement. Narmer smiled. One day, it would be Khufu who sat on this throne, ruling over Egypt with an iron fist. One day it would be Khufu who heard the cries of the people, not with indifference, but with amusement. For what are the cries of the people but the music of the gods, he thought, his eyes gleaming with madness. He had brought peace to the country, he knew that. But peace cost money, and he needed that money to build his temple. He would use these prisoners to do it, working them to death, just as his predecessors had done. That was the way of things. Finally, he came across a group of prisoners who caught his eye. Among them was a man with a strong jaw and wary eyes, a man who had once been a general in Horus' army. Narmer smiled. This man would do nicely as his vizier. And so it was that Egypt entered a new era. Under Narmer's rule, the country flourished. Trade routes were reopened, the economy stabilized, and construction of the great temples continued apace. The people were prosperous, but they lived in fear of their pharaoh, for he was a cruel and capricious ruler. At night, they heard the wails of prisoners working on the construction sites. In the morning, they found the bodies of those who had failed to meet their quotas, left as an example to the others. Still, most dared not speak out against him, for Narmer had shown them what he was capable of, when he had crushed the rebellion in Thebes. Only the very old and the very young remembered what life had been like before Narmer, when the country was ruled by pharaohs who cared about their people. But their memories were fading fast. In the palace, Narmer watched as his son Khufu learned to wield a scepter. The boy was eager, his eyes bright with excitement. Narmer smiled. One day it would be Khufu who sat on this throne, ruling over Egypt with an iron fist. One day it would be Khufu who heard the cries of the people, not with indifference, but with amusement. For what are the cries of the people but the music of the gods, he thought, his eyes gleaming with madness. Hello and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. This video is dedicated to one of my patrons. If you'd like to submit your own video request, please let me know by sending me a message or by commenting below this video. And if you enjoy learning about ancient Egypt, please consider supporting me on a platform. Your support helps bring these videos to life. When one thinks of King Narmer, we often imagine him uniting Egypt and establishing order after a period of chaos. While it is true that he is credited with bringing Upper and Lower Egypt together under one rule, making him the first pharaoh of the unified kingdom, that is only half the story. What many people don't know is that Narmer's reign was marked by extreme cruelty. He instilled terror throughout Egypt. It seems that in order to unite Egypt and establish the first dynasty, Narmer needed to make an example out of those who opposed him. He was merciless towards his enemies. Let's talk about how he established his new capital city at Memphis. But before we move on, if you're new here, remember to subscribe so that you don't miss more videos about ancient Egypt. And if you enjoy what you see, consider liking the video and supporting the channel. In the early days of Egyptian civilization, there were two independent regions known as Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Both regions were ruled by local nomarchs, officials with both political and religious powers. During Narmer's rise to power, Upper Egypt was controlled by a powerful nomarch named Nekane. As we mentioned in our previous episode, in order to subdue Upper Egypt, Narmer had to march south and defeat Nekane's forces at the Battle of the Scorpion. According to Egyptian tradition, the battle took place in the area of the modern-day city of Kina. The scorpion mace head found near the city of Abydos depicts Narmer wearing the crown of Lower Egypt and standing over a defeated enemy who is lying at his feet. Narmer crushed the scorpion's forces and claimed victory. However, the war wasn't over yet. Narmer still had to deal with another powerful leader from the south, King Kenek of Nubia, after securing his power in Upper Egypt. Narmer set his sights on conquering Lower Egypt. There he encountered King Kenek of Nubia, also known as the Kingdom of Kush. The ancient Kingdom of Kush was located in what is now the northern part of Sudan. Despite being further south than Upper Egypt, King Kenek was able to successfully invade and control the northern territories of Egypt, likely because the Egyptians weakened themselves by fighting amongst each other. In the Egyptian hieroglyphic language, King Kenek's name was written as a good king. So when he ruled over Egypt, he was called a good king of Upper and Lower Egypt. So while Narmer was considered the king of Lower Egypt and Kenek was considered the king of Upper Egypt, the truth was that Kenek was actually ruling both regions. According to Egyptian records, Narmer once again emerged victorious. This time he took the title King of the Two Lands of Upper and Lower Egypt. He united Egypt under his rule, ending a period of disunity and establishing the first dynasty. Narmer is considered the first pharaoh of the unified kingdom. He established his capital at Memphis, the first capital of Egypt. This would be the capital until the 27th dynasty. That is a span of over 2,000 years. Narmer's unification of Egypt was a significant event that marked the beginning of a new era in Egyptian history. Under his rule, Egypt transitioned from a collection of fragmented states to a centralized kingdom, setting the stage for the subsequent dynasties and leaving a lasting legacy on Egyptian civilization. However, in order to achieve this unity, Narmer resorted to extreme measures that demonstrated his ruthless and vengeful nature. The cruelty after victory. That afternoon, Narmer walked among the prisoners with their hands tied behind their backs. His face was cold, without a trace of mercy. A chieftain knelt, blood streaming, and begged, "Please spare us. We will give you grain, fish, and gold." Narmer did not answer. He raised his stone mace and brought it down hard on the head of the other man. Blood and brains splattered on the ground. Then he turned to his courtiers. This is the fate of those who oppose Pharaoh. This scene is depicted on the Narmer stele. The slab bears inscriptions telling the story of Narmer's victories over his enemies. One side of the stele depicts Narmer, who is shown wearing a crown and holding a crooked flail, symbols of his kingship and dominion over the pharaoh's cattle. He is smiting down an enemy king. On the other side, Narmer is shown wearing a different crown. It's a so-called red crown of Upper Egypt. The stele tells us that Narmer's armies defeated
86 towns
and brought all of Egypt under his rule. The brutality of Narmer's actions is also reflected in another artifact, the Narmer palette. The Narmer palette is an ancient Egyptian ceremonial palette made of stone and decorated with scenes from Narmer's reign. One side of the palette depicts Narmer wearing a crown and holding a scepter. On the other side, it shows him smiting an enemy king. These artifacts provide insights into the violent nature of Narmer's conquests and the means by which he consolidated his power. They serve as a reminder that his rise to power was not merely a triumph of diplomacy and strategy. It also involved a significant amount of bloodshed and subjugation. Narmer's cruelty was not limited to his enemies. His rule was marked by excessive violence and oppression. He delighted in inflicting pain and suffering on his subjects. He chained men and women to chariots like horses, whipping them as they pulled him around. He hosted feasts inviting 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat. Once during a banquet, he unleashed poisonous snakes into the audience at a bull-leaping contest and watched with amusement as the crowds panicked and fell victim to poisonous bites. He chained women to chariots like horses, whipping them as they pulled him around. He chained up young boys and girls, then released poisonous snakes into the audience at the children's games and watched as they panicked and got bitten. According to legend, even Narmer's wife and his son were not safe from his wrath. She was given the title Great of Praises, perhaps because she survived his murderous rages. As for his son, he was said to have been put to death by his own father. The cruel pharaoh is also believed to be responsible for building Egypt's first prisons. You can only imagine the kind of punishments he inflicted on his prisoners. His sadistic behavior knew no bounds. He chained people to chariots like horses, whipping them as they pulled him around. He organized feasts inviting 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat. He chained women to chariots like horses, whipping them as they pulled him around. Once, during a banquet, he unleashed poisonous snakes into the audience at a bull-leaping contest and watched with amusement as the crowds panicked and fell victim to poisonous snake bites. Even small children were not spared from his sadistic games. He chained up young boys and girls, then released poisonous snakes into the audience at the children's games and watched as they panicked and got bitten. No one was safe from his wrath, not even his own family. His wife was given the title Great of Praises, perhaps as a consolation prize for surviving his murderous rages. And his son met a horrible end at his father's hands. We hope you enjoyed learning more about the cruelty of Pharaoh Narmer. If you want to support us and get access to exclusive content, consider becoming a patron. Visit our page to learn more. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. The sun rises over the Nile Delta, the sky above a brilliant blue with fluffy clouds floating by slowly, but below, the world is one of chaos. There are thousands of men locked in combat, weapons flashing, bodies crashing to the ground, the air filled with the stink of sweat, blood, and mud. This is the Battle of the River Marsh. It's between the army of Upper Egypt and that of Lower Egypt. It will decide once and for all who controls the entire Nile Valley. Two rival brothers are on opposite sides of the field, and one will die today. This is the story of King Narmer. Our story begins around 3200 BC in the ancient Egyptian city of Nekinad. In those days, Egypt was divided into two kingdoms, Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. The division wasn't based on any natural barrier, but was a result of human ambition. The kings of Upper Egypt liked being called Upper Kings because it sounded better than Lower King. The same was true for the northern rulers. They just thought their part of the valley was more important. And so it had been for hundreds of years. But now there was a young king in Nekinad, and he wanted to unite Egypt under his rule. His name was Narmer. He was a warrior king, and his symbol was the red crown. Historians think that he may have ruled before, but very little is known about his early life. It's possible he was related to previous kings, but if so, we don't know who. The records are incomplete or perhaps too old to translate. We don't even know his parentage. But what we do know is that he was ambitious. Narmer's grandfather, probably on his mother's side, ruled over Nekinad. But when he died, Narmer's father took the throne. He was called Koskami. While his father was alive, Narmer ruled as viceroy, a sort of deputy king. In this position, he expanded Narmer's territory southward, conquering new lands and building new towns. Then, when his father died, he inherited the throne and became the king of Upper Egypt. His first act as king was to organize an invasion of Lower Egypt. For hundreds of years, the rulers of the north had kept the south weak. They did this by funding rebellions, stirring up internal conflict, and setting one town against another. But now, Narmer wanted to put an end to this. He was going to march north and force the whole of Egypt to submit to him. To make sure he had enough troops, he recruited warriors from Nubia, a region to the south. These mercenaries would join forces with his elite guards, made up of hand-picked soldiers from all over Upper Egypt. Together, it numbered about 3,000 men. Then Narmer set out to conquer Egypt. He marched north along the east bank of the Nile, stopping at Memphis to recruit more troops. After a month of travel, he reached the river marsh, where he prepared to face the army of Lower Egypt. The Egyptian pharaoh who opposed him was a petty, insecure ruler named Net-Jerekit. Like Narmer, he too was ambitious and wanted to dominate the entire valley. Though to be fair, he'd done a pretty good job of ruling Lower Egypt. He'd established a dynasty that lasted for about 200 years. His vizier, or chief minister, held power in his place while he spent his time on frivolous things like hunting trips and making love with many women. But still, he'd managed to expand Lower Egypt's borders and secure its wealth and power. Now, though, he stood to lose everything. Neith's army was larger than Narmer's, composed of soldiers drawn from the ranks of local governors, landowners, and merchants. On the morning of the battle, Neith oversaw his forces as they assembled on the west bank of the river. His vizier advised caution. First, they should scout Narmer's position. They could then select a strong defensive location and wait for the enemy to come to them. But no, Neith was overconfident. "Let them come," he told his vizier. "I will slaughter them." And so the pharaoh ordered the troops to attack. As the sun rose, the two armies met on the wet marsh of the delta. The drums of war resounded, and wave after wave of soldiers crashed into each other like waves crashing against a cliff. The soldiers of Upper Egypt fought fiercely, pushing back the enemy and forcing them toward the river. Spears pierced chests, the sound of steel hitting bone, the smell of blood mixed with the mud. Behind the front lines, archers fired arrow after arrow into the enemy ranks. They couldn't hit a specific target, but they did instill fear and panic. Also on the move were chariots. They raced across the muddy field, scything down anyone in their path. On the other side of the field, Narmer rode a primitive chariot of his own. He was charging straight into the center of the lower Egyptian army. Each swing of his mace crushed a skull. Shouted, his voice rising above the drums. "There is only one king between the upper and lower. The gods have chosen me, Narmer." As the battle raged, Narmer led his elite guard to the heart of the enemy lines. Their goal was simple: kill the pharaoh. It didn't take long to reach him. He was surrounded by bodyguards, but Narmer was unstoppable. Finally, he reached Nithadap and killed him in single combat. When the pharaoh fell, the rest of the Egyptian army began to break. The survivors fled, leaving the battlefield littered with corpses. Once the last man had retreated, Narmer left his horse and walked through the field, surveying the carnage. In the distance, vultures were already flying in the sky, waiting to feast on the corpses. Then, turning to his chariot, he drove back to Memphis. As the legend goes, when Narmer entered the city, everyone submitted to him. He'd won the battle, and now he was going to rule over both parts of Egypt. Over the next few decades, Narmer's descendants united the country and brought peace to Egypt for the first time. They also helped the economy flourish and trade to thrive. The kings who followed Narmer were considered founders of a new dynasty, which historians call the early dynastic period. Did King Narmer actually exist? That's difficult to say. Many scholars believe he did, but no archaeological evidence has been found to prove it. We don't have a tomb or even a statue of Narmer. What we do have is legend and written accounts, such as the Palermo stone, which describe his deeds. Some historians say the story of Narmer is a myth, created to legitimize the new dynasty. If this is true, then it's one of the oldest myths in recorded history. In reality, Egypt had no single founder. Rather, it was formed by a series of small states competing for power along the Nile River. The people of Egypt weren't united until much later, when Alexander the Great conquered the country in 332 BC. Still, safe to say that a king like Narmer did exist. There must have been a warrior who united Egypt under his rule, even if that warrior wasn't called Narmer. It seems clear that ancient Egyptians wanted to remember this king. They described him as tall, muscular, wearing a leopard skin, and holding a scepter and mace. In some images, he wears a crown, and in others, a traditional pharaoh's headdress. He was a powerful king. We can tell by the fact that his symbols were copied and reused by every pharaoh who came after him. So who was Narmer? We may never know for sure, but it doesn't matter. He represents a time when Egypt went from being divided to being united. Whether he was real or imagined doesn't matter either. The story of Narmer captures the imagination and inspires awe at the ancient world. So let us take a moment to remember him. Let us remember the king who united Egypt and gave it peace. Thank you for watching. The god Horus is typically depicted with the head of a falcon or an ibis. However, in this statue, the great king of the Third Dynasty, who ruled between 2686 and 2613 BC, chose to be depicted as a baboon holding a crook and flail, the tools of the Egyptian shepherds. He ruled over a vast kingdom that stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Nubian Desert in the south, and from the Libyan border in the west to the Red Sea in the east. His empire was prosperous and peaceful. 40 years he built temples and monuments to the gods. His name was given to all parts of Egypt, and even the pharaohs after him took the title of Sesostris the Great. He died old and venerated by his people. But how did a simple shepherd become such a powerful pharaoh? This is the story of Narmer, also known as Menes, the legendary founder of the First Dynasty. Now, before we start the video, just a quick note. Since ancient Egypt records were poorly kept, it's impossible to tell whether the kings of the early dynasties were really related. So I'll stick to calling them kings and not pharaohs, since the title pharaoh may have been introduced later. Alright, let's begin. Narmer was born around 3200 BC in the small town of This was located near the modern city of Abydos, in the eastern Nile Delta, his father was a petty chieftain, and his mother was a high priestess. From his mother, Narmer inherited a strong faith in the gods and learned the ancient rituals that had been passed down for generations. He spent his youth traveling through Egypt, meeting various local leaders and learning about the culture and customs of its many peoples. After his mother's death, he returned to his hometown and took over his father's position as chief. At this time, Egypt consisted of many small, fragmented states that were constantly at war with each other. Narmer, however, refused to follow in his father's footsteps and instead opted to forge alliances with neighboring rulers. Soon, he was able to unite most of the small states along the Nile River under his banner and became the most powerful ruler in Egypt. But he didn't stop there. He continued to raise an army and make preparations for war, which caused the other rulers to become suspicious and form an alliance against him. The united armies of Egypt met at the Battle of Memphis. And although Narmer's forces were outnumbered, he was victorious. In the aftermath of the battle, he entered Memphis and took the throne of the city, officially making himself the king of unified Egypt. To commemorate his victory and the unification of the country, he superimposed the red crown of Lower Egypt on the white crown of Upper Egypt, creating the double crown. From then on, he became the first king to wear the double crown, a symbol of unity. Before his people, he declared, "From now on, there is no more Upper Egypt, no more Lower Egypt. There is only Kemet, the black land of the Nile, and I, Narmer, am your first pharaoh." The people cheered, but amid the cheers of joy there were still echoes of weeping for the thousands of corpses left on the battlefield. Narmer, however, did not rest on his laurels. He wanted to secure his position as king of Egypt. For this purpose, he traveled to the Levant and made contact with the Canaanites and the Nubians. With these new allies, he launched a series of military campaigns to conquer the surrounding areas. He pushed north into Syria, where he fought against the rulers of Kadesh and defeated them. He also led his armies south to conquer Nubia and establish Egyptian rule over the region. In addition to his military campaigns, Narmer also undertook large building projects to glorify his reign. He built temples and monuments to the gods and erected a huge stone at the entrance to his capital city, Memphis, which served as a boundary marker between the mortal world and the realm of the gods. On it, he had himself depicted as a pharaoh wearing the double crown, holding a crook and flail, and standing next to an offering table laden with goods. The stele, now known as the Palermo stone, was one of the earliest attempts to legitimize a ruler, his power by connecting himself to the divine realm. One day, while on a hunting trip, Narmer came across a wounded bird with a broken wing. He took the bird back to his palace and had it cared for until it healed. When the bird was well enough to fly again, Narmer let it go, and the bird returned to its nest. A few days later, Narmer was flying back from a campaign when his own plane developed engine trouble and was forced to land. As he struggled to get his plane repaired, he heard a familiar sound, the cry of the bird he had saved. The bird had found him and helped him by leading him to its nest, where the villagers welcomed him and took care of his plane. Narmer was deeply moved by the bird's loyalty and gratitude and realized that he had been blessed by the gods. From that day on, Narmer considered the bird his totem animal and adopted its image as his personal symbol of power. He also established a cult in its honor, which would become one of the most important cults in Egypt. As time passed, Narmer's legend grew. It was said that he was a demigod, the son of the sky goddess Ra, the sun god. They say that after he had ruled for 64 years, he went up to the sky in a boat pulled by baboons and became one of the gods. While some historians believe that Narmer was a real historical figure, others believe that he was a mythical hero. However, what is certain is that Narmer is credited with uniting Upper and Lower Egypt and establishing the first dynasty of pharaohs, which would rule over Egypt for nearly 3,000 years. Now we will talk about his successor, King Sesostris I. Sesostris I succeeded his father Narmer and continued his legacy of building and expanding the Egyptian kingdom. Under his reign, Egypt reached its greatest territorial extent. Sesostris conquered the Sinai Peninsula, Palestine, Mesopotamia, and Nubia, and secured Egypt's borders against outside threats. He also established trade relations with distant lands, such as the Levant, Mesopotamia, and the Indus Valley. This brought immense wealth to Egypt and helped to further strengthen Sesostris' power and prestige. In addition to his military and economic achievements, Sesostris was also a great builder. He built temples, palaces, and tombs throughout Egypt, many of which are still standing today. One of his most famous building projects was the White Chapel at Giza, a mortuary temple that he built for himself. The temple was decorated with beautiful paintings and sculptures depicting scenes from his life and reign. Another notable building project was the expansion of the city of Thebes, which he made the new capital of Egypt. Sesostris also built a number of defensive structures such as fortresses and walls to protect Egypt from invaders. One of the most impressive was the wall he built around the city of Cairo, which was over 10 miles long. Sesostris' reign was also marked by great cultural achievements. He was a patron of the arts and sciences, and his court was a center of intellectual activity. Under his rule, Egypt experienced a golden age of literature, music, and poetry. Sesostris was also responsible for the construction of the first lighthouse in history, which was built during his reign in the city of Alexandria. The lighthouse was one of the ancient world's 7 wonders, and it guided ships safely into port. Towards the end of his reign, Sesostris became increasingly interested in religion. He built temples and shrines throughout Egypt, and he appointed priests to influential positions in his court. Some historians believe that Sesostris was influenced by the religious revival that was taking place in Egypt at the time. Others believe that his interest in religion was part of a deliberate strategy to gain popular support and legitimize his power. Whatever the reason, Sesostris' religious policies had a profound impact on Egyptian society, and they would shape the course of Egyptian history for centuries to come. After ruling for 76 years, Sesostris passed the throne to his son, King Teti. Despite his advanced age, Sesostris remained active in politics, and he continued to play an important role in the affairs of the kingdom until his death. He was succeeded by his son, King Teti, who would continue the dynasty's tradition of building and expansion. Overall, Sesostris' reign was a golden age in Egyptian history. Its military conquests, building projects, cultural achievements, and religious reforms left a lasting legacy on Egypt and its people. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. The war is over and it's time to celebrate. But in the middle of the party, one question was on everyone's mind. What will happen next? Now that King Narmer has united Upper and Lower Egypt under one rule, what would come of this union? Will it last? Only time would tell. And speaking of time, it's that time again. It's time for a new episode. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to find out how Narmer established order in Egypt after his victory at the Battle of the River Nile. The battle is over, and Narmer, the king of Upper Egypt, has just defeated his rival Nekane. The two halves of Egypt are his now, and with it, all the people. But as they say, a conquering army marches on its stomach. His army is tired and hungry. They need food. In fact, they're so hungry that they're ready to eat anything, even crocodiles. Narmer didn't want his men to do that because he had a plan. He wanted to take advantage of this victory and make sure that from now on, the people of Lower Egypt don't think of themselves as different from those of Upper Egypt. He wanted them to be one. But how can you unite people who hate each other? The answer was simple: food. Narmer ordered his soldiers to catch as many crocodiles as they could. Then he took them to the market where people were selling other meat, roasted them over an open fire, and served them to all passers-by. It was a huge success. People loved the taste of crocodile meat. As they ate, they forgot their anger and their difference. Some even asked for more. This continued for days until all the crocodile meat was finished. Then something amazing happened. As people started talking to each other, they asked about each other's customs and traditions. They started forming friendships and liking each other. And when they went back home, they told their families about the great king from the south, who had not only given them delicious food to eat, but also taught them a valuable lesson about life. But while this feast was going on, someone was fuming in his palace. Nekane, the king of Lower Egypt, whose army Narmer had defeated. He was licking his wounds and planning his revenge. One day he would get his own army together and march south to conquer Upper Egypt. He swore revenge. Meanwhile, Narmer, oblivious to Nekane's plans, was celebrating his victory with a feast. People were dancing and singing, drinking and eating. And then suddenly, someone approached him and whispered in his ear. It was bad news. Nekane's army was approaching. His spies had seen them. cold look appeared on Narmer's face. He was disappointed. Just as he had thought that the war was finally over, it seemed like it was time to start again. Narmer quickly got himself ready and mounted his horse. He knew exactly what to do. He rode to the top of a nearby hill and shouted loudly for everyone to gather around. After everyone had gathered, he raised his hand and said, "Listen to me, my brave warriors. Once again, Nekane comes to us from the north to start a war, but this time he will not succeed. I have made the north into a granary. It is full of food and riches. We're stronger than our enemies, so let us go defeat them once and for all." Narmer's men cheered as they heard these words and charged down the hill toward Nekane's forces. When the two armies met, it was as if water had been released from a dam. It's all the fighting, the screams, the clash of weapons, the shouts of encouragement, the rumble of chariots, and the neighing of horses filled the air. It was a deadly battle, one that neither side could win, so both armies kept fighting. Narmer fought bravely. In the end, he managed to kill Nekane, but not without losing a few good men. Both sides suffered heavy losses. In the end, Narmer won, but it wasn't easy. After securing victory, Narmer returned to Memphis with his soldiers. They'd won the war, but now it was time to unite the land. To show the people that he meant them no harm, Narmer decided to hold a festival in Memphis. The whole city was decorated with flowers and colorful banners. Everyone was invited. People came from all over to see their new pharaoh. Narmer welcomed them all with open arms. He wanted them to feel at home in Memphis. He organized games and competitions, races and wrestling matches. Chariots pulled by strong bulls raced across the racetrack, while young men wrestled in the dust. Women and children watched from the sidelines, cheering and clapping. Even a pharaoh joined in and wrestled a few times himself. Everyone laughed and joked, and soon the whole place echoed with cheers. The atmosphere was festive, joyful, and fun. After the games, Narmer called everyone to gather around him. The crowd settled down as he began to speak. "My subjects," he said, "I have become your pharaoh because the gods chose me. I am here to serve you, to protect you, and to lead you to prosperity. I know there are still some who resent the rule of Upper Egypt. They do not trust me, but I promise you this, I will not force them to submit. If they wish to leave, let them leave. But those who stay will be treated equally, regardless of which part of Egypt they come from." The people applauded. They'd found a good leader who cared for them. Narmer consolidated his power over the next few years, traveling to the four corners of his kingdom to meet his people. He was greeted everywhere with joy. The crowds cheered and shouted, "Long live the pharaoh!" Now that peace had returned to Egypt, trade and agriculture flourished. The economy improved and the standard of living rose. But as Narmer grew older, he knew he wouldn't be around forever. He needed someone to take his place, someone strong enough to keep Egypt united. Who could that be? Looking around, he saw his vizier, a man of wisdom and experience. He trusted him completely and appointed him as his heir. Narmer knew that Egypt would be in good hands. The time had finally come. The long-awaited ceremony was being held today. Narmer would pass on the power to his vizier, signifying the official transfer of authority. People had gathered from all over to witness the historic event. They had come to see the new pharaoh take the throne. But before that, they had to see the old pharaoh step down. The entire kingdom waited with bated breath for Narmer to pass on the throne. When the vizier was announced, he entered the hall and took his seat on the throne. Everyone stood up and cheered as the new pharaoh lifted his arms in acknowledgement. As the celebrations were at their peak, Narmer emerged from behind a curtain holding a staff in his hand. The staff symbolized power and authority. Slowly he approached his successor and handed it over. A hush fell over the crowd. This was the moment they had been waiting for. After the transfer of power, Narmer stepped back and bowed to his successor. He had done all he could for Egypt. Now it was time to rest. The new pharaoh, in turn, bowed to his predecessor, acknowledging all he had done for Egypt. The new pharaoh looked out at the sea of faces before him. He knew he had big shoes to fill, but he was ready. He had learned from the best and would continue Narmer's legacy. With a newfound determination, he addressed his people. "I am your new pharaoh," he proclaimed, "and I promise to serve you to the best of my abilities. I will make sure that our kingdom continues to prosper and that we remain united." The crowd cheered. They had faith in their new leader and knew that Egypt was in good hands. During his coronation at Memphis, Narmer wore the red crown of Lower Egypt on his head, superimposed on the white crown of Upper Egypt. From then on, he became the first king to wear the double crown, a symbol of unity. Before his people, he declared, "From now on, there is no more Upper Egypt, no more Lower Egypt. There is only Kemet, the black land of the Nile, and I, Narmer, am your first pharaoh." The people cheered, but amid the cheers of joy, there were still echoes of weeping for the thousands of corpses left on the battlefield. Narmer had succeeded in uniting Egypt, but at what cost? Hey guys, thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see you in the next video. In the 31st century BC, along the fertile banks of the river Nile, a man named Narmer ascended to the throne of Egypt and became the first pharaoh of a united kingdom. Now, while this event is considered a pivotal moment in ancient Egyptian history, marking the beginning of the early dynastic period, the true story of Narmer's rise to power is far more nuanced and complex than what history books let on. Our traditional narrative often glosses over the darker aspects of his reign, such as the potential displacement of indigenous populations and the brutal subjugation of rival chiefdoms. In fact, Narmer's legendary status might have been meticulously crafted by his successors to paint him as a benevolent ruler, when in reality, he was probably more of a conqueror than a liberator. You see, before Narmer came into the picture, Egypt wasn't just a single entity. It was actually a collection of small chiefdoms scattered across the Nile Valley. These chiefdoms were ruled by local nomarchs, who jealously guarded their autonomy and independence. The situation was much like Europe in the years before the Roman Empire, a jumbled mess of feuding kingdoms with no overarching authority. But then along came Narmer, the ambitious king of one of these petty chiefdoms, located in the southern region of Egypt, whose goal was nothing short of dominating the entire valley. To achieve this goal, Narmer set out on a series of military campaigns, which ultimately led to the expansion of his territory. And while history remembers this as a triumph over the forces of disunity, a victory for order over chaos, it's important to recognize the significant cost of this transformation. Narmer's wars of unification were far from chivalrous. He was known for employing scorched earth tactics, basically burning everything in sight. This involved destroying villages, killing livestock, and burning crops to deny resources to his enemies. In one particularly gruesome account, he is said to have ordered every last person in an upper Egyptian town to be put to death, sparing none. Even women and children weren't safe from Narmer's wrath. Now imagine being a peasant living in ancient Egypt during this turbulent time. You're tilling your fields, trying to eke out a living in this unforgiving environment, when suddenly you find yourself caught in the crossfire of a brutal war. Your village is raided, your family is slaughtered, and you're forced to flee for your life. Where do you go? What do? You become a refugee in a strange land, stripped of your home, your identity, and your very humanity. That was the harsh reality for many Egyptians under Narmer's rule. To make matters worse, those who managed to survive the war were often subjected to forced labor. They were compelled to work on monumental construction projects, like pyramids and temples, essentially turning them into slaves without actually owning them. So the real story of Narmer's reign is a tragic song, a melody of blood and power where the scales are tipped heavily towards the latter. He is hailed as a hero, but behind the scenes there's a sinister undercurrent of violence and oppression. It's a tale that reminds us that the path to greatness is rarely paved with kindness and compassion, but with the blood, sweat, and tears of countless victims. Let's move forward now to the next chapter of Egyptian history, the Old Kingdom, or the Age of the Pyramids. This era is considered a golden age in ancient Egypt, a time of stability, prosperity, and cultural achievement. However, the foundation of this seemingly idyllic period was built on the backs of countless slaves who toiled and suffered under inhumane conditions. We tend to romanticize the pyramids as majestic symbols of human ingenuity. These gigantic structures stand as silent sentinels to a glorious past. But what we often overlook is the human cost of their construction. The building of the pyramids was a massive undertaking that required a staggering amount of manpower. Estimates suggest that it took around 20,000 workers, both skilled and unskilled, to construct one pyramid. These workers were not your typical, highly paid professionals. They were mostly peasants who were forcibly conscripted for the project, meaning they were basically slaves. Imagine being a peasant farmer working from sunrise to sunset to feed your family. Then when you should be resting, you're summoned by the state to work on the pyramids. You have no choice but to comply. If you resist, you'll face severe punishment. So, you spend your days hauling heavy stones, carrying out the orders of your overseers. All the while, the hot desert sun beats down on you relentlessly. And when one of your fellow workers collapses from exhaustion or a sudden illness, there's no sympathy, no aid offered. Instead, they're dragged away to die, their fate a grim reminder of what will happen to anyone who dares to falter. This was the harsh reality of the workers who built the pyramids. Their lives were a constant struggle against the punishing elements in the oppressive regime. Yet even in the face of such adversity, they persevered, driven by the hope of one day returning home, or simply the desire to stay alive. Now let's talk about something that may sound quite shocking, but believe me, it's entirely true. Underneath the magnificent pyramids of Giza, there's a secret that's been buried for centuries. Archaeologists have discovered mass graves containing the remains of hundreds of workers who died during the construction of the pyramids. These findings give us a glimpse into the dark reality of pyramid building. These workers, who were mostly young men in their 20s, didn't die peacefully in their beds. Many of them were found with injuries consistent with severe beatings, suggesting that they were brutally punished for failing to meet quotas, or perhaps for daring to defy their overseers. Some of the bodies had rope marks around their necks, indicating that they were strangled, while others had their skulls crushed, showcasing the level of brutality they were subjected to. To add to the grim picture, some workers were discovered buried in shallow pits, hastily covered with debris, a stark contrast to the elaborate burial chambers found elsewhere in the pyramids. This suggests that these individuals were not valued by society. They were seen as expendable commodities, easily replaced and quickly forgotten. It's a sobering thought that beneath those iconic structures lie the bodies of men who suffered unimaginable pain and indignity. Their story serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of our obsession with grandeur and power. I think it's crucial to remember that while ancient Egypt achieved remarkable feats of engineering and art, it did so at a tremendous cost. The grandeur we admire today was built on the foundation of forced labor, oppression, and unimaginable suffering. The lives of those who built the pyramids serve as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of adversity. These men, stripped of their dignity and condemned to a life of servitude, nevertheless created structures that continue to amaze us thousands of years later. Their story challenges us to confront the darker aspects of our history and to appreciate the true cost of the luxuries we enjoy today. So as you stand in awe of the pyramids, take a moment to remember the workers who toiled and died beneath the scorching sun. Their sacrifice, though long forgotten, is an integral part of the pyramid-esque story and a powerful reminder of the human cost of our fascination with the past. As we come to the end of our journey through ancient Egypt's golden age, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. Is it ever okay to glorify a regime that thrived on the suffering of its people? The answer, I believe, is a resounding no. We cannot turn a blind eye to the atrocities committed in the name of progress or tradition. It's our responsibility to learn from the mistakes of the past and ensure that such horrors are never repeated. As we continue to explore ancient civilizations, let us do so with a critical lens, acknowledging both their achievements and their flaws. Let us not be dazzled by the grandeur of the pyramids or the riches of the pharaohs, while ignoring the suffering of those who made it all possible. Only then can we truly understand the complexities of our shared history and work towards a better future. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more fascinating historical tales. And if you want to delve deeper into the world of ancient Egypt, be sure to check out the links in the description below. Till next time, stay curious and keep exploring the past. Narmer clenched the stone mace in his hand. It was the king's weapon, a symbol of authority. The old pharaoh had passed it to him, his successor, during the ceremony 3 days ago. But today Narmer wasn't a ceremonial ruler. Tomorrow he would lead his troops into battle against the invading Nubians. If he faltered, the kingdom would disintegrate into warring states. And if the Nubians prevailed, desert nomads would plunder and pillage the riches of the Upper Nile. Either he would unify the country under his rule, or die trying. He looked out over the assembled army, 10,000 strong, their faces painted with the white war makeup of the nomarchs, the local lords who answered to him. There were men from Thebes and the city-states in between, Many had never met before, much less fought together. Now they were an army. At least they would be tomorrow. His gaze fell on the two men standing apart from the others. One was Khnumhotep, his vizier, a man whose loyalty and counsel he valued. The other was Taita, his general, a warrior who knew every trick of battle and whose courage was as renowned as his skill with a spear. Narmer hoped they could contain the differences that had nearly destroyed their kingdom and focus on the threat at hand. The pharaoh raised his mace. Murmur rippled through the troops. Silence descended once more. Narmer began to speak, but the words caught in his throat. What right did he have to lead these men? He was a scholar, not a warrior. His father, the pharaoh, had been taken by a sudden illness 3 days ago. Leaving the crown to Narmer and the kingdom in peril, the troops shifted impatiently. Some muttered, and a few openly complained. Narmer swallowed, forcing the lump in his throat down. He couldn't afford to lose their support now. He had to convince them he was their pharaoh, their leader. Narmer took a deep breath. "My lords," he began, "I know you have questions. I will answer them on the field tomorrow. For now, you are soldiers of the Nile. Our enemies outnumber us 2-1. They come from the south. Led by their king, a man called Kashta, who claims to be a descendant of the kings of old, who once ruled all of Egypt. They come to take what is rightfully theirs. They say, do not believe him. He is a liar and a murderer. His only claim is that he slew his brother to take the throne. Let that be a lesson for you. Do not let ambition drive you to such deeds. That place is not worth the blood of your brothers. But that is his choice, not yours." He paused, letting his words sink in. "He will not find us unprepared. Tomorrow we fight to reclaim what has been stolen, to defend our homes and families. We fight to protect the legacy of our ancestors. Tomorrow we fight to make Egypt whole again. Who will stand with me?" A roar went up from the assembled soldiers. They shouted, "We will stand with you," and pledged their allegiance to the new pharaoh. Narmer nodded, satisfaction radiating through him. Now they were an army, 10,000 strong, an army with a purpose. As the sun rose the next day, Narmer stood at the head of his column, riding his war chariot alongside Khnumhotep and Taita, his heart hammered against his ribs. The troops surged forward, eager to meet the enemy. The Nubians were camped along the riverbank, their tents a riot of color against the green. Narmer urged his horses forward. His soldiers followed, their shouts echoing across the valley. There was no time to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies. This would be a battle of skill and strength, of strategy and endurance, and Narmer had faith in his generals. He had faith in his soldiers. But as he watched the battle rage, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. Was he out of his depth? Could he really do this? The thought was a whisper at first, then grew into a roar that drowned out the din of battle. Suddenly, Taita was at his side, his face grim. "Lord Pharaoh," he said, "we must ride into the fray. Our men need us." Narmer hesitated, then reached for the mace. He knew what he had to do. Grasping the mace tightly, he urged his horses forward. As he reached the front line, the roar of battle faded away. All he could hear was the pounding of his own heart. When he looked back, he saw Taita fighting alongside his men, his spear flashing in the sunlight. Beside him, Khnumhotep calmly directed the archers, his staff held high like a general of old. The sight gave Narmer confidence. His generals had the situation under control. All he had to do was hold on tight and keep his seat. The desert wind whipped around him, carrying with it the smell of dust and sweat and something else, the metallic temps of blood. Narmer closed his eyes. The image of the battlefield burned into his eyelids. He had survived the battle, but at what cost? How many of his men still lived? Would the kingdom rally around him or crumble into chaos? When he opened his eyes, he saw Khnumhotep and Taita approaching. Their armor dented and scratched, their clothes torn and dusty, their faces grim. Narmer swallowed, his throat dry. "The battle," he croaked. Taita shook his head. "We lost," he said, his voice hoarse. "The Nubians are upon us." Narmer felt a surge of panic, then pushed it down. He was the pharaoh. He had to be strong. He had to find a way to save his people. He glanced at Khnumhotep, who was watching the retreating soldiers with a troubled expression. Then he turned back to the battlefield. He had to make a decision. Should he flee with his generals and a few loyal soldiers and regroup? No, he couldn't abandon his people. He wouldn't. He drew himself up to his full height and gripped the mace tightly. "Sound the retreat," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "We may have lost the battle, but we will win the war. Swear it by the gods." His generals looked at him in surprise, then nodded. They knew the pharaoh was right. They would win the war. As the retreating soldiers reformed and prepared to defend their positions, Narmer clenched the stone mace in his hand, the king's symbolic weapon. He replied in a hoarse voice, "Tomorrow. Either I become the one who unifies this country, or I die, and my name is carried away by the desert wind." Khufu, the name, strikes fear into the hearts of many Egyptians today. Perhaps because he was the first pharaoh to really embrace that divine kingship, which would set him up for a long legacy of power in Egypt. The year before last, we did a series on the mythical founder, king of Egypt, King Minos, who is believed to have founded the Egyptian civilization out of nothing. After his death, Egypt fell into the rule of nomarchs or governors until a certain man named Narmer from the south united Egypt under one banner and established the first dynasty. Then after a couple more dynasties, it came to an end with the sixth dynasty being ruled by a king named Teti. And during his reign, Egypt faced some hardship, but it was during his son's reign, King Uhebka, where Egypt would hit rock bottom. But the next ruler would change all of that, and that was King Pharaoh. And even though he wasn't the first to rule, he would go down in history as the first true king of Egypt. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to look at the life and legacy of King Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramids of Giza. You know, if you've ever seen those pyramids and wondered just how they got there, well, we'll take a look at that and so much more. So let's get started. Let's start with the man who would change the course of Egyptian history forever, the great Sneferu. When he came to power, Egypt was in ruins. Its people were tired of the rule of the nomarchs, and they needed a strong leader to take them to prosperity again. And who better than the legendary general of King Teti, none other than Sneferu. Now it's important to mention that Sneferu wasn't actually related to King Teti. They weren't even from the same regions. But Sneferu was a legend in the military scene. Even rival rulers would call him to their courts to settle disputes over land or policy because everyone respected the man. So when Ubaka died suddenly, Teti's court was left in chaos, and there was no clear successor. But Sneferu, seeing an opportunity to unite Egypt once more, gathered his army, marched north, and defeated the armies of the nomarchs, thus beginning the fourth dynasty and bringing stability to the country. He then moved the capital to a new city that he built and named it after himself, Sneferu. But it didn't take long for Sneferu to realize what had been holding Egypt back from being prosperous for a long time. It was the fact that they kept fighting each other instead of working together. So to foster unity across the nation, he embarked on a massive building project, building temples to every god and goddess throughout the entire nation. This brought the people together and earned him quite a lot of popularity. However, what made him earn a spot among the gods was the bent pyramid. Sneferu wanted to build something spectacular, something that would show the world the power of Egypt and its king. But not many people know that the bent pyramid was not actually the first pyramid that he built. He first built a smooth-sided pyramid in Medum, but it collapsed halfway through construction and was never finished. Then he tried again with the red pyramid, which was a success, but it wasn't what he had in mind. But then he decided to build the bent pyramid, which was going to be his masterpiece. The bent pyramid was the first pyramid to have an angled side, a design that has stuck with pyramids since then. Sadly, though, it was never finished either, but still stands tall as a testament to Sneferu's genius. However, it was around this time that Sneferu grew ill and sent his son Khufu to rule in his stead. But while Khufu was ruling, his father passed away. And with the kingdom now his, Khufu decided to continue his father's legacy by completing the bent pyramid. He also built several temples in the city of Abydos. However, like his father, Khufu wanted to build something magnificent. While visiting the quarries of Torah, he saw thousands of limestone blocks sitting around doing nothing and had an epiphany. He would build a pyramid bigger than any other pyramid that had ever been built, something that would become a staple of the Giza Plateau for thousands of years. And with that, the plans for the Great Pyramid of Giza began. Now, there's a bit of a problem here, because according to historical records, Khufu ruled for 51 years, Yet the Great Pyramid only took about 27 years to build. So historians believe that someone else actually completed the pyramid after Khufu's death. And that person was none other than Khufu's son, Khafre. Khufu probably reigned for 51 years. It is a historically documented fact. But the whole story about him building the Great Pyramid is actually a fabrication by the Romans. When they came across the Great Pyramid, they thought it was the tomb of their mythologized king Minos, and so they attributed all of these stories about him to their supposed ancestor. In reality, the builders of the pyramid are unknown, but the most popular theory is that it was indeed Khufu's son, Khafre, who finished the project after his father's death. Now, don't be confused, because another Roman writer, Plutarch, claimed that it was Khufu who built the second pyramid as well, which is the one known as the Sphinx's pyramid. But that claim isn't exactly accurate, because that pyramid was built by King Menkaure, who was Khufu's grandson, and he was the one who built the last pyramid at Giza. Now, personally, I think this is just confusion caused by the fact that everyone called themselves Khufu's descendants so they could use his prestige. But it's highly unlikely that Khufu was actually responsible for building the other two pyramids. Anyway, it's said that while the pyramid was being constructed, Khufu's vizier Himunu visited him one day and said, "You have indeed built your pyramid, O king, but where are the workers and the cattle who built it?" Khufu turned pale when he heard this, and realized that he hadn't paid any attention to the logistics of building such a huge structure. He sent his men to find out how much grain and money had been spent, and it was so much that he was stunned. He then summoned Himunu and gave him the task of overseeing the food supplies and making sure that everything went smoothly. Together, they managed to finish the pyramid without bankrupting the kingdom, and that showed the world the power of Khufu's Egypt. As a result, the surrounding kingdoms trembled in fear at the sight of Khufu's power and influence. And so they all submitted to him, bringing Egypt under one banner for the first time since the days of King Narmer. Khufu then went on to make more building projects, such as the solar boat that was found buried beneath the pyramid, as well as building temples throughout the land. But in his final years, he might have gone a little too far. As time passed, Khufu grew older and more ambitious. One day in the palace, Khufu once told his ministers, "When I die, this pyramid will be my ladder to heaven. You will no longer remember Narmer or Djoser. You will only remember Khufu, the immortal." His advisors were shocked by his megalomania, but they couldn't say anything. Khufu continued, "I am the shepherd of Egypt, and you are my flock. Wherever I go, you must follow. Do not forget that the Nile flows for our pleasure. The green fields belong to us. Every tree is ours to shade us, and every bird sings to praise Khufu." But one advisor finally spoke up and said, "O king, you may be the shepherd of Egypt, but Egypt is also the shepherd of the shepherds. Without Egypt, you are nothing but a pauper. Remember that you are only human." Khufu was furious, but he knew that what he was doing was wrong. He had taken things too far. So he apologized to his ministers and asked for their forgiveness, which they readily granted. From that day forward, Khufu learned humility and became a better ruler. He continued to rule for many years after that, finishing his projects and ensuring that his kingdom stayed in power. Sadly, though, even the greatest empires come to an end. And after 51 years, Khufu's time had come. Before his death, he summoned his son Khufu and gave him a speech. He said, "Listen carefully to what I say, for when I am gone, you must do these 3 things. Put my body in the pyramid, call yourself the shepherd of Egypt, and do not allow any foreigner to enter the temple of Ptah." Khafre listened intently, taking notes of every word his father said. And when the time came, he followed his orders to the letter. And so that's the story of King Khufu, the builder of the Great Pyramids of Giza. He was a great ruler who brought Egypt to prosperity and laid the foundation for the future of the Old Kingdom. But what do you think? Do you agree that he was the greatest pharaoh of the 4th dynasty? Let me know in the comments below. That would be amazing. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and share with a friend. If you haven't subscribed yet, then what are you waiting for? Click that button and join the family. Till next time, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Narmer became a legend, but that legend was written at the most terrible price: the lives of tens of thousands of people. The first dynasty of unified Egypt was born in the throes of violence, but it was destined to become a golden age. The age of the pharaohs who united the country under one banner had begun. But how did the Egyptians of that time live? What about their culture? What about their lifestyle? What were they doing in their spare time? This is what we'll talk about today. Welcome to our channel, and let's get started. After the legendary King Minos united the lands of Upper and Lower Egypt, the kings who succeeded him gave their empire a golden age. From now on, the rulers of Egypt considered themselves divine incarnations, the sons of the sun god Ra, who had the only true faith and the sole right to rule the country. This is how the first dynasty of the ancient kingdom arose, which lasted from 3100 BC to 2890 BC. This dynasty was remarkable in that during this period, the Egyptians began to believe that even death was not an end, but rather a transition to another world. And when the ruler passed away, his body had to be preserved for all eternity, so that his soul would have somewhere to return. That's why the tradition of mummifying the dead arose. The first pharaoh to set the trend was King Unas. His successors followed suit. To gain immortality, the Egyptians erected buildings that were unparalleled anywhere else in the world. Monumental pyramids were built near the capital Memphis, which were intended to serve as the eternal dwelling place of the pharaohs. In addition to the burial chambers deep underground, the kings were placed in ornate coffins made of precious wood and metal, and to prevent the remains from being damaged, they were wrapped in bandages soaked in resin. The bodies of some individuals were covered with gold leaf, turning them into veritable mummies. The process of creating such a mummy took up to 70 days. The wealth of the country and its size are evidenced by the fact that such expensive burials were possible for several generations. At the same time, the population of Egypt was estimated to be between 2 and 3 million people. In those days, many senior officials and nobles were buried in the same way, but on a smaller scale. As you probably already understood, the construction of the pyramids required a lot of manpower, which was in short supply. That's why it was introduced, meaning that every able-bodied citizen had to work on the construction of the Pharaoh's tomb for 3 months every year. It's hard to imagine how everything functioned without modern equipment and tools. However, the Egyptians didn't just build pyramids. Thanks to the introduction of metal tools, agriculture was able to provide food not only for the workers of the king's grandiose tombs, but also for the entire population of Egypt. The increase in agricultural productivity led to a surge in population growth and the development of crafts. In particular, the Egyptians learned to make boats out of wood and papyrus. This greatly facilitated transportation along the Nile River, since it allowed not only transporting goods, but also traveling quickly between cities. The river became a vital artery for the new state, connecting its disparate regions. It's believed that around that time, the Egyptians invented paper, although there's still considerable debate among historians about this. Be that as it may, the ancient Egyptians possessed advanced knowledge in various fields, including mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Moreover, thanks to trade with neighboring countries, the Egyptians acquired rare materials such as incense, ivory, and precious stones. In turn, they supplied the neighboring states with grain, linen, cloth, and gold. A skilled workforce led to the emergence of trade unions, which enjoyed the protection of the pharaohs. Culture and everyday life in ancient Egypt. But not only the material side of the life of ancient Egypt was highly developed. Their culture and everyday life were unique. For example, the ancient Egyptians loved to feast. The tables were loaded with a variety of delicacies, and the guests were entertained by musicians playing various instruments. They particularly enjoyed harp music. Ancient Egyptian feasts weren't just about food and entertainment. They were an integral part of religious ceremonies honoring the gods and the pharaohs. One of the most popular festivals was the celebration of the flooding of the Nile River, which coincided with the beginning of the new year. The festivities lasted for several weeks and were accompanied by boat races, wrestling competitions, music, and dancing. The main thing for the Egyptians was to show their devotion to the divine rulers and ask them for blessings. Ancient Egyptians dressed quite colorfully. Men wore a simple white loincloth called a shendet, while women preferred to wrap themselves in a long rectangular piece of fabric that reached their ankles. The wealthy members of society could afford more luxurious garments made of linen or fine cotton. Jewelry was also very popular, especially among women. They wore necklaces, bracelets, earrings, and rings made of precious metals and stones. Makeup was also used to emphasize the beauty. Women painted their eyebrows and eyelashes with special paints, and used coal to line their eyes. Ancient Egyptians lived in houses made of mud brick. The poor lived in small single-room dwellings, while the rich had large mansions with courtyards and gardens. In addition to the residential area, the city had administrative, religious, and commercial buildings, as well as workshops and granaries. The Egyptians of that era kept pets, but not those that we're used to today. They kept falcons, ibises, and baboons, which they trained to perform various tricks. Hunting was also popular among the Egyptians. They hunted birds, reptiles, and even dangerous animals like crocodiles. For this purpose, they used bows and arrows, as well as nets and traps. Religion and afterlife. One of the most significant aspects of life in ancient Egypt was religion. The Egyptians were polytheists and believed in a pantheon of gods and goddesses. Ra, the sun god, was considered the supreme deity. Other important gods included Osiris, the god of the underworld, Anubis, the guide of souls, and Isis, the goddess of magic and healing. Religion permeated all aspects of life, from the construction of temples to the rituals of the pharaohs. The priests held a prominent position in society and were responsible for maintaining the rituals and traditions. Egyptians believed in an afterlife, and this belief shaped many aspects of their culture and daily life. They mummified their dead, preserving their bodies for eternity, so that the soul could return to them in the afterlife. Funerary temples were built to honor the deceased and provide them with the necessary provisions for their journey to the next world. The Egyptians also had a complex system of beliefs about the underworld and the judgment of the dead. According to their beliefs, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of truth. If the heart was pure, the soul was allowed to enter the field of reeds. But if it was found to be guilty of sin, it was devoured by a monster named Ammit, and the soul was condemned to non-existence. This fear of divine judgment influenced the behavior of the Egyptians in life, encouraging them to be virtuous and pious. Art and architecture. The art of ancient Egypt was primarily religious in nature. Sculptures and paintings depicted gods, pharaohs, and scenes from their daily life. The most famous examples of Egyptian art are the colossal statues of the pharaohs and the intricate paintings found in the tombs. The architecture of ancient Egypt was characterized by monumental structures such as the pyramids and temples. These structures were built with massive stones and were designed to last for centuries. The pyramids served as tombs for the pharaohs and were often adorned with intricate chambers and passages. The temples, on the other hand, were dedicated to the gods and were used for religious ceremonies and rituals. The most iconic symbol of ancient Egyptian architecture is, of course, the Great Sphinx with its enigmatic smile. Despite being located in different parts of the world, ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia shared many similarities, especially in their religious beliefs. Both civilizations believed in an afterlife and practiced rituals to ensure the safe passage of the soul to the next world. They also both had a pantheon of gods and goddesses and believed in the importance of appeasing the divine beings through sacrifices and prayers. Additionally, both cultures valued knowledge and developed systems of writing and mathematics to record their history and facilitate trade. However, ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia differed significantly in their political systems and social structures. Ancient Egypt was ruled by a centralized government with a pharaoh at its head, while ancient Mesopotamia was composed of independent city-states. Moreover, ancient Egyptian society was highly stratified with a clear hierarchy, whereas ancient Mesopotamian society was more egalitarian. Despite these differences, the cultural exchange between ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia was significant. Trade routes connected the two civilizations, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and religious practices. The similarities and differences between ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia offer a fascinating glimpse into the diverse ways in which ancient civilizations developed and interacted. And that's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Please don't forget to leave us a comment, like, and share it with your friends. Ancient Egypt, a place where history comes alive through magnificent ruins that have stood the test of time. One of the most iconic sites in Egypt is the majestic pyramid of Khufu, a testament to the ingenuity and power of the ancient Egyptians. But what if I told you that there is another pyramid hidden in plain sight that is even more spectacular? The story behind this lesser-known pyramid is one that will leave you in awe and maybe just a little bit jealous. The construction of the pyramids was a massive undertaking that required the labor of thousands of people over many years. It's hard to imagine the scale of the operation, but it was truly a marvel of ancient engineering. So who decided to embark on such a monumental project and why? Let me introduce you to Imhotep, the man who designed the Saqqara pyramid. Imhotep was an architect, a mathematician, and a priest. And he was one of the most gifted and influential figures in ancient Egypt. He served under King Djoser, who ruled from 2672 to 2640 BC, and together they set out to create something truly special. The original design of the pyramid was actually quite different from what we see today. It started out as a simple mastaba, a type of flat-topped rectangular structure that was commonly used as a tomb in ancient Egypt. But as construction continued, it grew into something more, eventually developing into the world's first pyramid. But the story doesn't end there. There are some fascinating details about the construction of the Saqqara pyramid that will leave you scratching your head and wondering how on earth did they do it. For example, you may have noticed that the pyramid isn't actually perfectly symmetrical. And that S because the ancient Egyptians didn't have any fancy tools like laser levels to make sure that everything was perfectly aligned. Instead, they had to rely on human skill and precision. And well, they weren't quite as accurate as modern construction crews. But hey, it's hardly noticeable unless you're a stickler for symmetry. So it's a small price to pay for such a magnificent structure. But the Saqqara pyramid is hiding another secret as well. Did you know that it has a secret entrance? That's right. There is a secret passageway that leads to a hidden chamber inside the pyramid. No one knows for sure what the chamber was used for, or if it was ever actually finished. But it's a fascinating glimpse into the ingenuity and mystery of the ancient Egyptians. Archaeologists have been able to discover these secrets thanks to modern technology like ground-penetrating radar and X-ray machines. They've also found some pretty interesting artifacts inside the pyramid, including fragments of wooden boats and a mysterious black granite sarcophagus. But despite all these discoveries, there's still so much that we don't know about the Saqqara pyramid. What other secrets is it hiding? What else can we learn about the ancient Egyptians and their way of life? Well, the answer to that question may lie with the next great architect of ancient Egypt, one whose influence would be felt for centuries to come. Let me introduce you to Pharaohs. As the daughter of King Sneferu, she was born into privilege and luxury. But she wasn't content with just living a life of leisure. She wanted to make her own mark on the world, so she took on a monumental task, designing and building her own pyramid at Giza. But that's not all. Pharaohs was also a patron of the arts and a builder of temples. She left her mark on many parts of Egypt, including the Great Sphinx of Giza, but perhaps her greatest legacy is the pyramid she built. It was a masterpiece of ancient Egyptian architecture, perfectly symmetrical and adorned with intricate carvings and hieroglyphics. Inside, she built a secret chamber, complete with a false door that symbolized her journey into the afterlife. Yet despite its grandeur, the pyramid remained hidden for centuries until archaeologists stumbled upon it in the early 20th century. But the discovery didn't come without controversy. Some believed that Hotephi's pyramid was actually the lost pyramid of the biblical Queen of Sheba. Others claimed that it was the final resting place of Jesus Christ. But these theories were later disproven, leaving us with the true story of a remarkable woman who broke the mold and defied the odds. So now that we've met the masterminds behind some of the most iconic structures in ancient Egypt, it's time to dive into the construction process itself. How exactly did the ancient Egyptians manage to build these massive pyramids? Well, the answer may surprise you. Despite their imposing size and grandeur, the pyramids were actually built in a surprisingly short amount of time. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, the largest and most famous of the three pyramids at Giza, took an estimated 20 to 30 years to complete. And the other two pyramids followed a similar timeline. That means that each pyramid was constructed over several generations, with each new pharaoh adding their own personal touches and refinements. But the real question is, how did they move the massive blocks of stone that make up the pyramids? You won't believe the answer. The ancient Egyptians didn't use any fancy equipment or technology to move these stones. They did it all by hand. That's right, yet these mighty structures were built with nothing more than brute strength and ingenuity. The workers would cut the stones into precise shapes using copper tools and then transport them to the construction site on wooden sledges. They would move these sledges using ropes and manpower, pulling them along dirt roads that were specifically made for this purpose. Once the stones arrived at the site, they were lifted into place using ramps and levers. It was a slow and laborious process, but it worked. And the result was a marvel of ancient engineering and human endurance. But while the construction of the pyramids is a testament to the strength and determination of the ancient Egyptians, it was also a costly endeavor. The pyramids were built during a time when Egypt was at the height of its power and wealth, but they also drained the treasury and required a significant investment of resources and manpower. Despite this, the pyramids remained an important part of Egyptian culture and tradition. And even today, they stand as a reminder of the incredible feats that humans are capable of. It's one of the most fascinating aspects of the pyramids is the way they were built in a hot desert environment. You might think that building a pyramid in the middle of the desert would be a piece of cake, but you'd be wrong. The harsh conditions and lack of resources made the construction process even more challenging. But the ancient Egyptians didn't let that stop them. They were determined to create structures that would last for eternity, and they did just that. The pyramids of Giza are still standing after all these years, and they continue to amaze us with their grandeur and mystery. And here's a fun fact that you might not know. Did you know that the Great Pyramid of Khufu is actually the oldest of the 7 wonders of the ancient world? That's right. This massive structure is the only surviving member of this prestigious list, which included other incredible creations like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and the Colossus of Rhodes. But the ancient Egyptians weren't content with just building one pyramid. They went on to create many more throughout history. In fact, there are over 100 pyramids scattered across Egypt, each one a testament to the ingenuity and creativity of this ancient civilization. The Bent Pyramid, also known as the Unfinished Pyramid, is a unique and fascinating structure that's definitely worth mentioning. It's one of the largest pyramids in Egypt, but it's also one of the most unusual. The pyramid has a distinctive bent shape, which is why it's given its name. This is due to a shift in the angle of inclination of the stones during construction. But thankfully, it hasn't stopped tourists from climbing to the top of the structure for an amazing view. If you're feeling adventurous, you can explore the pyramid's interior and discover a secret chamber with a mysterious hole in the wall that some believe could lead to a secret tunnel leading to the nearby Red Pyramid. As I've mentioned, the pyramids were built over many years, and each pharaoh had their own unique vision for their pyramid. This led to a variety of designs and construction techniques, which resulted in some truly remarkable structures. For example, the Black Pyramid at Dashur is one of the oldest major pyramids in Egypt, and it's also the darkest. The reason for this is that the stones used in its construction are a rare type of black granite, which gives the pyramid its distinctive color. But not all pyramids are made of stone. The White Pyramid at Giza, also known as the Pyramid of Khufu, is actually the oldest and largest pyramid made entirely of white limestone. This created a stunning contrast with the darker stones used for most of the other pyramids, and it made the structure truly stand out. The pyramids of Egypt are not just impressive structures, they're also a source of mystery and intrigue. One of the most famous mysteries surrounding the pyramids is the discovery of a secret chamber inside the Great Pyramid of Khufu. This hidden chamber was discovered in 2017, using advanced imaging techniques, and it's believed to contain valuable artifacts and information about the construction of the pyramid. Another fascinating mystery is the alignment of the pyramids with the stars. It's believed that the pyramids were aligned with the stars in the sky to create a celestial map of the universe. This suggests that the ancient Egyptians had a deep understanding of astronomy and their knowledge of the cosmos. As I've mentioned, the pyramids were built over many years and by many different pharaohs. This means that there's a wide variety of pyramid shapes and sizes to explore. Some pyramids are tall and slender, while others are short and wide. Some are perfectly symmetrical, while others have unique angles and designs. There are even some pyramids that were built in non-traditional locations, such as the Black Pyramid at Dashur, which is located in a quarry rather than a traditional pyramid complex. If you're interested in learning more about the pyramids of Egypt, I highly recommend checking out the links in the description below. These resources will provide you with even more information about the construction techniques, historical significance, and cultural importance of these amazing structures. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos about ancient Egypt and other fascinating topics. Thanks for joining me on this journey through ancient Egypt. Until next time, keep exploring the world around you and never stop learning. A cold wind swept across the barren sands of Egypt, sending a flock of startled birds into the twilight sky. Here, where the sun bleeds into the horizon, stands the Great Pyramid of Khufu, the oldest and mightiest of the three pyramids at Giza, for over 4,500 years. Its stoic presence has defied the relentless march of time. But what secrets lie within its eternal embrace? What wonders and horrors await those daring to venture into its shadowy depths? Let's find out today, in this episode of A Civilization of Blood and Stone. The entrance to the pyramid is hidden somewhere among these huge blocks. It's not visible from the outside. But according to legend, anyone who discovers the entrance will find unimaginable treasures inside. Scientists believe that the entrances to the underground labyrinth are located near the center of each of the three sides of the pyramid. Among the local population, there is a legend that says that there are actually two secret passages leading deep into the bowels of the pyramid. One of them leads to a treasure trove filled with treasures beyond compare, and the other leads to an even more impressive sight: the petrified body of the ancient Egyptian pharaoh, Khufu himself. Some rumors say that the entrance to the secret passage lies directly behind the statue of Khufu, but no one has dared to test this theory for fear of waking the great pharaoh from his slumber. There is another version according to which the corridor leading to the pharaoh's burial chamber lies in the queen's chamber. This is the only room in the Great Pyramid that scientists still haven't been able to explore. Perhaps it's not entirely empty. Perhaps there really is something more than just an empty pit. After all, during the excavations, they came across a large hole in the wall from which some fragments of granite were removed. Where did they go? To whom and for what purpose? These questions remain unanswered. We can only guess that the portal to the second secret corridor lies behind the masonry of the queen's chamber. But let's stick to the first option for now, the treasure chamber. How does one find the entrance to the mysterious room? According to legend, it's guarded by a terrible curse, the curse of stone. There's a legend that one dark night, a group of tired workers who had been working on the construction of the pyramid for many years decided to escape from the cursed construction site. At least that's what people think the story was about. Tired of backbreaking work, the builders were caught and dragged before the all-seeing Pharaoh Khufu. He didn't punish the would-be deserters or throw them into the Nile. The Pharaoh didn't even get angry. He just smiled coldly and said, "You want to escape your fate? The stone will never forgive traitors." Then the workers' faces drained of color, and they collapsed on the cold stone floor, turning into statues right before the eyes of the horrified witnesses. And the next morning, their bodies were buried right in the foundation of the pyramid. It is believed that the souls of the unfortunate men have become the curse of the stone, guarding the pyramid's secret from prying eyes. People who ventured too close heard the screams of the damned, felt their icy fingers clawing at their bodies, and saw apparitions of horrifying creatures made of stone. They told stories of how, while exploring the pyramid, they could feel the malicious touch of invisible hands on their bodies. Sometimes entire groups of tourists claim to have seen gigantic humanoid figures composed of stone fragments moving between the corridors. Their shadows loomed over the explorers, driving them to the brink of insanity. Was this the curse of the stone? Who knows? At the beginning of the 20th century, British engineer Man Dixon set out to find the entrance to the secret chamber. According to legend, it was he who heard the whispers of the curse. As soon as he set foot inside, the air grew uncomfortably cold, and he heard voices that seemed to come from the walls themselves. "Go back," they hissed. "You are not welcome here. Turn back while you can." Terrified, Dixon fled the pyramid and never returned. So perhaps the legend of the curse is true. Or maybe it's just a clever hoax designed to keep the pyramid's secrets safe from intruders. What do you think happened to the engineers? Do you feel like the curse of the stone is real, or is it all fiction? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. In the days when Khafre, the successor of Khufu, ruled the Egyptian kingdom, people in neighboring lands told stories about a mighty ruler living in a palace of stone. From the depths of the earth, he summoned architects and artisans to his court, promising untold riches and eternal glory in exchange for the construction of a majestic pyramid that would become the tallest structure in the world. Thousands of people flocked to the banks of the Nile under the promise of untold fortunes. However, none of them ever left the Giza plateau alive. The workers lived in a tent city near the construction site. For years, the buzz of activity echoed across the desert, mixing with the rumble of the Nile and the songs of cranes. Each day brought the Great Pyramid closer to its intended height, and the wealth of the pharaoh increased exponentially. But the number of workers decreased every year. Fewer and fewer people returned from the plateau, and those who did usually went insane. They babbled incoherently about walls adorned with precious stones, traps that opened fire with arrows, and vengeful statues that came to life at night. Nobody paid much attention to these ravings, until one day a visitor to the construction site captured one of the escaped workers. His name was Imhotep. After being locked up in a dark room for several weeks, the man finally agreed to talk. He told a tale of a wondrous palace deep within the pyramid, where the pharaoh hosted lavish feasts, inviting guests from all over the world. But as soon as someone stepped over the threshold, he would never be seen again. The walls of the Great Pyramid swallowed him whole. And if you didn't manage to escape, you would be forced to watch endless processions of nobles entering the pharaoh's hall until your eyes fell out of their sockets and your soul withered away. Then your body would be thrown into the bottomless abyss under the pyramid. Everyone thought the madman was full of fantasies, except for the leader of the expedition, who was eager to see the magnificent treasures of the Egyptian pharaoh with his own eyes. That's why he set out on a secret journey to the heart of the pyramid. Oh, but after descending deep into the ground, he began to hear strange sounds. At first it was just the murmur of voices, then the rhythmic thud of hammers and the murmur of saws. It sounded like a massive construction project was underway deep beneath the ground. Suddenly a huge boulder rolled past his head, narrowly missing him and crashing into the wall. Startled, the leader looked around and saw a small inscription on the stone. It was a warning to all travelers to turn back before it was too late. But the leader wasn't one to heed such warnings. He continued his journey and soon found a passage blocked by a heavy stone gate. Deciding to check if it was locked, he pushed it open and gasped in astonishment. Before his eyes lay a wide corridor filled with a faint light. Following the sound of hammering, the traveler approached the wall and pressed his ear against it. The sound of construction was getting louder, and he could even distinguish individual voices. Gathering all his strength, the leader broke through the last barrier, and there, like a mirage, appeared a whole city carved out of stone. Astonished, he stood at the entrance, unable to tear his gaze away from the marvelous spectacle. The city was indeed a marvel to behold. Buildings were adorned with precious stones, streets were paved with gold and silver, and the walls glittered with jewels. The leader noticed that the workers were diligently carving statues of Khufu, and it occurred to him that this was how the pyramid's insides might have looked in the pharaoh's heyday. Suddenly he felt a sharp pain in his neck, and clutching his bleeding neck, he stumbled backward, knocking over a vase with a magic potion. Immediately, the walls began to tremble and collapse, burying the stone city along with its workers under a mountain of debris. The leader managed to escape before the entrance collapsed, but he was seriously injured and died soon after. Sometime later, archaeologists discovered his diary describing an amazing subterranean city. However, they never found any traces of the lost civilization. Perhaps it was all a figment of the leader's imagination, or maybe the curse of the stone city exists, swallowing anyone who dares to disturb its peace. I hope you enjoyed this adventure. Which version do you think is true? The curse of the stone, or the bloodthirsty pyramid that devours intruders? You decide. Write your assumptions in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on the most exciting episodes. Still have many mysteries to uncover and adventures to live through together. See you next time.